The Mets are doing a lot this offseason so far. Not Juan Soto, not yet, but they're making moves, most notably with the pitching, trying to build back up their rotation since they're losing a couple of guys, starting with Luis Severino, who was able to snag the biggest A's contract ever. Severino was a one-year guy anyway, same with Sean Manaea, who hasn't signed anywhere yet, and so is Frankie Montas, the Mets' newest prove-it signing for a pitcher. And what I mean by that is the short-term investment, low-risk, high-reward scenario they're going for, and it's pretty smart. Instead of going after the biggest names on the market for pitchers, the Mets have been getting guys on one-year deals, and what that does is add an incentive for them to pitch really well, because if they do, look what just happened with Luis Severino. They get a nice contract. That's a really good strategy, honestly. It's safer, obviously, than giving someone like Corbin Burnes a 7-year contract, and so Montas in his 2-year, $34 million contract with an opt-out after 2025 is the Mets' newest low-risk, high-reward scenario. But as the title of this video suggests, the Mets are taking a risk. Not because of Frankie Montas, but because of the next pitching signing they just made in Clay Holmes. There will be at least one former Yankee joining the Mets this offseason, if not Juan Soto, as they just signed Holmes for 3 years and $38 million. There's nothing too crazy at about $12.5 million a year, but that's not the risk. The risk is what the Mets plan to do with Clay Holmes, something who's been a reliever pretty much his entire career up until right now. The only time Holmes has ever started was back in his first ever crack at the big leagues in 2018 with the Pirates, and he was really bad. It was only 4 starts, but still, not good. He walked more hitters than he struck out in those 4 starts. His ERA was over 7, and then as a full-on reliever in 2019, his rookie year, Holmes was just straight up bad, and it'd be that way for the majority of his time in Pittsburgh. And after 42 more innings with an ERA pushing 5 to begin 2021, the Pirates were happy to trade the guy for a bag of chips, shipping Holmes off to the Yankees in exchange for 2 players who are long off the Pirates now. But at the time, obviously, you can't really expect any much of a valuable return for someone who hadn't shown any success at the big league level to that point. But the Yankees obviously saw something in him, and after bringing him aboard and tweaking some things like having Holmes ditch his curveball and lower his arm slot, changing his mechanics up a little bit, Holmes became the best reliever in baseball, at least for a certain period. He was that good, and it was another funny example of the Pirates being dumbasses and having no clue as to what they're doing. But he definitely didn't leave the Yankees and their fans with a good taste in their mouth. He wasn't awful in 2024. I mean, on the surface, his ERA was 3.14 in 63 innings, which is almost exactly what he threw in all of his seasons with the Yankees. So he was consistent to take the ball and overall good, but the issue is he just wasn't really reliable enough as a lockdown guy. He blew 13 saves, and by September had lost his job as the Yankee closer. Well, now he's a Met, and they don't have any plans for him to be their closer, but rather moving him to the rotation, and honestly, this makes sense to do. At least in theory, and something to experiment with, especially with some recent examples of teams doing this and having it pay off. Ronaldo Lopez was a starting pitcher earlier on in his career, had some good times, some bad times, and ended up in the bullpen for a few years before the Braves decided to sign him and turn him back into a starter, and he was awesome. Now, he did deal with some injury issues last year, but he was so dominant in 2024, he became an all-star for the first time, put up an ERA under 2, he was great. Jordan Hicks, the guy who could throw 106-mile-an-hour pitches with sink, was mostly a reliever until the Giants signed him on to be a starter, and he wasn't as great as Lopez, but it was still something that worked fairly well, especially for his first year doing it, which you kind of have to expect some sort of a transition period where they're not going to be at their best. And I think this is the right way to go about Clay Holmes if you're the Mets. The thing about Holmes is, yeah, he might have some stretches here and there where he was dominant as hell as a closer, but overall he's proven to be way too unreliable for that role or any high leverage role in the bullpen. Again, he can be lights out in those roles, but also completely collapse. He showed that way too much. And I think if you're going to bring Holmes aboard like the Mets are, the best potential value you can get out of him is turning him into a decent starter. Will he be an ace? No, probably not. That shouldn't be the expectation, but I think Holmes becoming a decent number 3 or 4 level starting pitcher is better value rather than what he was with the Yankees mostly. Because as of right now, even if you wanted him to be a reliever, Holmes isn't going to be the Mets closer, so he'd be what, your 7th or 8th inning guy, and not really that promised to thrive in that role? That doesn't seem worth getting him, but if you can turn him into just even a decent starter, he doesn't have to be great, just decent. I think he will be worth his contract for the Mets. There is risk with it, obviously, because it can blow up in their faces. What if Holmes is just straight up awful as a starter, and now you have to hope he goes back to being a good reliever? That can happen too, but the way the Mets have been operating lately, getting guys like Shamania, Luis Severino, and helping put their careers back on track, and then seeing what other teams have done with this whole converting a reliever into a starter thing and the potential that it has, I think the Mets are making the right call here. Holmes definitely has the potential to do this. He's a good sinker that can get him a lot of ground balls, that can help him rack up innings, which again is mostly what the Mets are asking for. Just be a good enough starter, and I think this will be the best bang for their buck the Mets can get from Clay Holmes. Let me know your thoughts, and thank you for watching.